Welcome to Wednesday with Clear Mountain. Today we're joined by Ajahn Dhammasīha. Thank you so much for joining us, Ajahn.
Thank you for having me. I'm Modena for maintaining a podcast with many outstanding teachers.
Thank you. And Ajahn joined us despite, I believe, a typhoon warning or what was it? A cyclone.
Cyclone. Okay. Southern Pacific is the cyclone. This is the same like a hurricane in the Atlantic.
So if things get blown away, we'll know what's happening. I'll do a brief, it doesn't seem like it's that bad though right now. So
I may have to close the doors at some stage if it's getting worse. The winds are picking up.
Okay.
We're on top of a hill.
So a brief bio. It's rare to find a monk who has an insider perspective on two traditions, but Ajahn Dhammasīha is one, having started his monastic life in Sri Lanka before moving to the Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah. Born in West Germany in 1966, Ajahn Dhammasīha studied business administration in West Berlin during the fall of the Berlin Wall. After encountering the Dhamma during extensive travels in India, he ordained as a Theravada Buddhist monk in 1995 at Nissarana Vanaya, Meetirigala in Sri Lanka, with the most venerable Pandita K, Jinavamsa, as his preceptor. His approach to practice was guided by the Suttas of the Pāli Canon, which he studied extensively in their original Pali language, and by the examples of senior monks like Venerable Ñānavimala and Venerable Ñānadīpa. From 1998 on, he trained in the monasteries of the Ajahn Chah tradition in Australia. During this period, he was fortunate to receive teachings from some of the foremost living teachers of the Thai forest tradition, such as Ajahn Tui, Ajahn Plien, and Ajahn Anan on their visits to Australia. Since 2007, Ajahn Dhammasīha has served as the founding abbot of Dhammagiri Forest Hermitage, providing Dhamma teachings and overseeing the physical development of the first monastery in Brisbane associated with the tradition of Longpo Cha. So I visited Ajahn Dhammasīha before once, and it's great to see you again, Ajahn. And just to kind of leap right into the bio, which I had read there, I wondered if you would be willing to just speak a little more about the events in India that led you to move towards taking robes and ordaining.
Okay, yeah. I had already spiritual aspirations. Could you put it a different way that I don't have myself?
Yeah, we have that happen a lot. People think they're...
It's difficult if I just look only at myself. It's nice if I can look at you.
We'll stay here, Ajahn. Nimon Ka.
Okay, thank you for that. I had already spiritual aspirations, and I was interested in some of the Hindu practices. I did some yoga, and then finishing my degree in business administration, I was looking for a way of bringing that kind of together. How can I make a living and live a normal life and at the same time pursue my spiritual aspirations? And so I started a PhD on Indian corporate culture, which was actually with a professor of cultural anthropology, a big shift from business administration, but he took it on. But my idea was already that I would have a lot of time in India, and I hoped to do a lot of spiritual practice in India, while at the same time maintaining this PhD and then also having some worldly career that I can earn some money. And in India, it became apparent to me that it's very difficult to do both. I mean, even just to getting the funds. Now I got a scholarship approved, but you have to write already in a kind of half a PhD for getting this scholarship and things. And it came to a head when I was in a hotel room in Allahabad, Prayag. This is where the Ganges and the Yamuna come together in the mystical third river, Saraswati. And I was in this hotel room and I was trying to figure out how I can both maintain my spiritual practice and my worldly need to earn some money. And for 2 weeks, I was kind of paralyzed. I would go out only once a day to eat or twice. And the other time I would exclusively agonize in my mind, how is that going to work? How can I maintain my visa? Can I just survive in the Himalayas? I went there in winter and even the foothills, it was really cold. And if you look at these sadhus, which this is a fluid dividing line between beggars and sadhus in India, and I wondered, now how can I do that? If I drop the PhD, follow only the spiritual path, can I survive as a kind of Indian sadhu in the Himalayas? And in the end, after 2 weeks of agonizing, I realized now I cannot work that out theoretically. And I managed to make the decision that I would drop this PhD and that I would pursue this spiritual path 100%, possibly maintaining the PhD for 1 or 2 more years just per forma, that I can have a visa, but not really doing anything there. And after that decision, I had a bathe in the Ganges because they just had the Arahant Mela, which is a very big gathering. The Ganges is very pure, but not necessarily very clean. So I closed all body openings as good as I could. It's also cold in winter. Some corpse floating in the distance. And I had my dip to kind of seal the decision that I would do 100% spiritual life now. And then very amazing, I was not yet a Buddhist. The day after, I went to one bookshop in Prayag and browsing around, and I found a Dhammapada. And I bought it and I read it, and it was 100% clear. I knew that I'm a Buddhist. I knew this is it. I was completely convinced. And I like to share that also to encourage others who may be in a similar situation. What I have found, it was so difficult to make that decision and to drop the PhD and to drop this concern, how do I survive long term, how do I make enough money? But once I decided I just follow the spiritual path, although I couldn't work out how, it was actually all quite easy. And after reading the Dhammapada, I knew now I'm a Buddhist. And I checked out, no, India is not exactly the best country to ordain as a Buddhist monk. But I went to 2 of the holy sites, that is Sarnath, the place of the first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and to Bulgaria. And that very strongly confirmed my decision. I was even more firmly determined. And then I decided to go to Sri Lanka, basically, to ordain. Sri Lanka is just the closest to India. So if you're in that situation, have the courage. And if you come here to Dhammagiri, you look at the buffet, which we get offered here every day. You look at our lifestyle. The least problem I had ever since making the decision was my material welfare.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so lovely to hear about your relationship with the Dhammapada. I have a similar love affair with the Dhammapada. And I'm curious if you could say more about the Nissarana Vanaya Meetirigala. I know I've read that its motto is realizing Nibbana in this very life, which is a pretty high goal and a very bold thing to say. Tell us about it. I don't think I've ever been there myself, but yeah.
Meetirigala Nissarana Vanaya was founded as, so to speak, to be the pearl of the meditation monasteries in Sri Lanka. I ordained in the Sri Kayani Sangstha, which is now the biggest place. The best known one is Nauyana, but there's also still the main place, Galdur. And within this whole tradition, that was meant to be the main meditation monastery. And the teacher there, Venerable Sri Ñānavimala, was actually senior to my Upacharya, Venerable Jinavamsa, who was the founder of that whole organization. But because Venerable Sri Ñānavimala was senior, he would treat him very respectfully. and he entrusted him as being the spiritual teacher in the main meditation monastery of that tradition. I came in after he had passed away, and even after his kind of main meditation disciple in the place when the Ñānananda had left. So when I came in, the place was in decline, one has to say that. But at the time of founding, and then for several decades, they had this motto. In fact, in the Pindapata Sala at the foot of the hill, where the monks would walk down every day to collect the alms food, they had a painting of this commentarial story where a few of the monks who attained very quickly under our Buddha Gautama had made the resolution in a previous life to retire to a mountain and to throw away the ladder that they have used to get there. So according to this commentarial story, they, I think it was about 5 or so, and then they started meditating on that mountain, and they had to basically attain or perish. And a few of them attained, a few not. But they had this resolution to retire on the mountain and throw away the rope, the ladder you used to get there, and then just meditate. And you wouldn't leave until you're either dead or you have realized Nibbana. And I think before I came, that was practiced quite strictly, and the monks were not expected to ever leave the place. They didn't even have a katina. It was meant to be exclusively for meditation. However, I think it was a little bit, at least when I came, I think it was a little bit too high an ambition. And for many of the monks, I think it was not necessarily beneficial.
So, Tan Ajahn, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Were you going to say more? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. So, you point to an interesting dichotomy I've seen motion to in Sri Lanka, where on one hand, I've heard the study tradition is emphasized a great deal in Sri Lanka. And on the other hand, you do have some of these luminaries, such as, Ñānavimala or Ñānavīra, these different, very well-versed monks, but also who people point to as guides in practice as well. And certainly this monastery seems to fall into that category. So could you just speak to what is the Western monastic scene like in Sri Lanka compared to the Thai forest tradition? You've had the unique experience of being in both and getting a glimpse of both traditions.
Yeah, first, as a caveat, I would be talking about 25 years ago. And I'm not that well clued in. I had another 6-week visit in Sri Lanka in 2006. Even that is almost 20 years. So I can't really give you a very good description of the current situation. Compared to Thailand, I think it is much more individualistic. And many of the monks, Western monks I met in Sri Lanka those days, they had more the inspiration or ambition to live rather solitary. They would often not have such great faith and devotion into a particular teacher in terms of a living human being, but many had great faith in the early Pāli Canon, in the scriptures, and would use that as their guidance. In particular, the monks which I admired or which I saw as kind of my teachers, in particular Venerable Ñānavimala, Venerable Ñānadīpa, also a disciple of Venerable Ñānadīpa and Venerable Ñānavimala, Venerable Metta Vihari, Venerable Kuttasila, and also Bhikkhu Bodhi. I think that were my main influences. In Thailand, I found a very strong that there's a strong faith that a particular teacher has fully realized the Dhamma, has attained Nibbana, and then you try to associate closely with them and take on the training as they have laid down it and take personal advice and instructions from them. As those days, these monks in Sri Lanka, it was mostly faith in the early parts of the Pāli Canon, and then studying that and practicing it.
Tan Ajahn, could you say a little bit more about who Venerable Ñānadīpa and Ñānavimala were, and what your relationship was with them, and if you have any particular stories about your time with them? That would be really interesting, I think, for people.
Venerable Ñānavimala is a German monk. He came to India and Sri Lanka in the 1930s. And interestingly, he was also more Hindu at that time. He wasn't a Buddhist, but he wanted to get to India to further his spiritual practice. He was very lucky or skillful that he actually managed under the Nazis as a young man to get out. But he worked for a big trading house. In the end, in Sri Lanka, he lived what he told me personally, the high life, colonial life. Although he wasn't a British, and they would accept him as a kind of a Westerner white person. And he was very fit, healthy, playing tennis and living with a kind of privileged colonial life, but still having his spiritual practice more on the Hindu side. Then when the Second World War started, Ceylon being a British colony, all German nationals were interned as prisoners of war. So was Venerable Ñānatiloka, the very senior German Buddhist monk, one of the very first Westerners we know of ordained, and the first one who really lived the monk's life until death. He died with more than 50 vasa. Mm-hmm. And in the internment camp in near Dehradun, in the Indian Himalaya foothills, Venerable Ñānavimala came under the influence of these Buddhist monks from Ceylon, the Western Buddhist monks from Ceylon, and under their influence he gained faith in the Dhamma. In fact, it came to a head with this very strict Hindu practice that he wouldn't touch anything that is not vegetarian. And of course, the food in the internment camp for prisoners of war will not be super rich anyhow. And traditional English kitchen is obviously not vegetarian. And I think he was so strict, if there's a stew, if there's any fish or meat in, he wouldn't touch any of it. So he would have probably died unless the Buddhist monks had convinced him that this is not a beneficial practice, but that the crucial point is the intention of killing, according to the teaching of the Buddha. But it already showed Venerable Ñānavimala's dedication to the practice and his willingness not to die for maintaining the standard of practice. After he became a Buddhist, he also would have loved to become a Buddhist monk, but no chance to do that in the internment camp. And although the Sri Lankan Buddhists luckily could lobby the British, that after the war, the Western monks were released back to Sri Lanka rather than being sent back to Germany. Venerable Ñānavimala, not being a monk yet, was actually sent back to Germany, which is an extremely difficult place to practice. He told me personally, he realized that it would be very, very hard to practice now. Although his whole ambition was only Dhamma practice with the full of his ability and becoming a monk, but no chance. And he said he decided that his main practice is simply keeping the 5 precepts, and even at the cost of his life. Mm-hmm. These were the days, there were a few cold winters and many people died from starvation. People would cut down the Central Park in Berlin just to have some firewood, not to die from the cold. Of course, that would be stealing. He wouldn't do that. People would survive by stealing a few potatoes from a truck or from a freight train. It's stealing. He wouldn't do that. People would survive by all kinds of deals on this black market where the currency was just cigarettes. but he wouldn't do anything that would involve lying and so on. I'm sharing that because I imagine in your audience is probably mostly laity.
Mm-hmm.
So they can maybe relate to that situation. And if you think it's difficult to practice in lay life, imagine if you're in Germany in 1945, 46, 47, and how difficult that is. And that was his approach. He finally got a place at a farm, and he would have to work 7 days a week, I think 12 hours a day, for nothing else but lodging and food. However, after some time, he got a job as an English teacher. And he mentioned actually the most difficult thing of keeping the 5 precepts now. You have to keep in mind that he was quite a young, healthy man, and he had been a prisoner of war for quite a number of years. And now he was back in lay life. And now he started teaching English. And he said the majority of his pupils were all young women. And most of them were very, very lonely. And the husband, very commonly a prisoner of war in Russia. The last one of those came back only in 1955. Or often missing in action. No one knows actually where they are, but they are married. And the ring is there. You mentioned that personally to me. That was actually the most difficult. And they were extremely interested in him. He was a bit more mature, but not old. He knew English. He had lived abroad. Germany was occupied now by Americans and British. He spoke the language, so you can imagine how attractive he would appear to many of these very lonely young women, who, however, were usually married or engaged. But 5 precepts.
I hold to that.
Three.
On that note, Tan Ajahn, with regards to advice towards laity, you speak about that decision you made, that transition point where you decided to surrender to this spiritual path. And for you, it seems like that mapped very clearly onto a decision to give up this PhD path and just pursue, in the end, monastic life. What advice would you give to a lay person trying to embody that same ethic or ethos of surrender, that same alignment of their life with Dhamma, but who doesn't have the ability to step back from the job or the family? How would you advise a lay person kind of navigating the current waters of the world, but trying to align their life with Dhamma as best they can?
I would use Venerable Ñānavimala here as an example. And if you can keep the 5 precepts, this is a very big thing in lay life. It's a very big thing. And I think some people may overemphasize how often and how many hours they sit meditation formally, and maybe think the precepts are not so important. But if you can do that and have a really pure 5 precepts for a long time, there's a great purification effect on the mind. I remember Melungpo Plien talking about that. And the devas can actually see that. A person, even in lay life, but if they have very pure 5 precepts and faith, they appear already much brighter to spirits and devas. Doesn't mean not to meditate, for sure, as much as possible, but not neglecting, not underestimating them.
On that note of how to brighten the mind, apart from just the 5 precepts, I think a lot of people watching this will have been privy to a kind of landscape of news and headlines, which for many is difficult, alarming, polarizing. How do you advise people to navigate the news? How do you advise they interact with current topics?
A very important question. Thanks for bringing that up. I think the very first thing is in a sense restraint. And Sanskrit explained Indriya Samvara, Indriyesu Kuttadvara, guarding the doors of the senses. That also has to apply to news. And now I acknowledge to some extent one has to remain informed. Like here, if a cyclone is coming in, it's obviously helpful to have some idea about that. But so much of the news people consume is more like infotainment, and it has no real beneficial impact. I think that one has to cut that down to actionable news. What is kind of news that is necessary for you to act on it? If it has no impact on the actions, what you can actually do, then it may be better not to even know about it. And I think a lot of the news people are consuming is of that nature. You wouldn't miss out on anything. You would be much better off simply to tune out, to tune out, and not to engage with that at all.
Ajahn, speaking of modern problems, I mean, you've mentioned a number of your teachers, or just a number of teachers in general, Venerable Ñānavimala, Venerable Ñānadīpa, Ñānavimala, Lumpur Tui, Lumpur Plien. You know, all of their writings, everything which they've ever written, which has ever been kept, put on paper, plus the entire Pāli Canon. You know, you've quoted some Pali already. All of that is now on the internet and has been loaded into AI, AI models. And I'm curious, given all of that, what is the role of a living teacher? Like, why would someone go to any of us for any kind of advice when they could just go to, you know, AI that's been trained on these best teachers ever?
I think it's another really important question. I think there's an avalanche of problems and developments approaching with AI, definitely. The first thing is that Venerable Ñānavimala wouldn't be in there because there's hardly anything available. The only thing we have is some notes people have taken. There's not a single recording I'm aware of, although quite a few monks felt that the personal Dhamma teachings and talks they received from him was about the best they have heard ever, but not a single recording. But even for those teachers who may have been very extensively recorded and we can feed it into AI, AI doesn't have consciousness. That is a crucial difference. And my conviction is that if you interact with another human being or any being that has consciousness, there's some direct interaction between the minds. And even now, it's not so easy to feel it, but I think even now, if you have a podcast like this to the other side of the earth, you can establish a bit of a rapport which goes beyond on what goes on here on the screen and on the loudspeakers. And my personal experience of meeting some of these really outstanding teachers and also the pilgrimage sites in India, foremost Bulgaria, there is some energy there which you can perceive and experience because you are not just AI, but you have a mind, you have consciousness, you've got a heart, a Citta. And I think that it goes directly from the Citta to some extent. And I'm totally convinced that if you sit next to an Arahant and there's a screen or a thin wall, but you're sitting very close, but the wall blocks out that you can't see him, you may not even know that he is there, you can't hear, there's no interaction through the five senses. I still believe that you are influenced. And in particular, if you were to meditate and you tune in, that your mind is a little bit closer to his level, and you're like tuning a radio, I think that you can get a lot on the non-verbal level. And you have to consider that the Buddha gives the conditions, the factors for stream entry, and it starts by Satpurisa Sangseva, as the number one, Sotapatti Anga.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think we nowadays assume that you can do that via YouTube, via reading transcripts, and so on. But in the Buddha's time, Sat-Buddhist Sangsiva always meant direct personal contact. I wouldn't want to take a kind of extreme position that you cannot become a stream enterer without ever having met someone who has been at least a stream enterer. But I personally believe that it is a huge, huge help. And if it's an Arahant, even better if you don't even just meet them once, but you have close contact. I mean, this is how the whole system was set up. That you have close contact. And a lot will come across. A lot will come across also by the way they act, and you just witnessing that, by seeing how relaxed they are. I'm always amazed, Luang Por Lia, when you go there on these big days, when he's sitting under his kuti and he's totally at ease and relaxed, like always.
Yeah, I felt that as well, with getting within like 12 or 15 feet of Luang Por Liam. There's like this, it changes my psychology just getting within that sphere of him. As you're speaking, I'm realizing, like, if you were to go up to ChatGPT and say, okay, you are an enlightened Kruba Ajahn of the Theravada tradition, and they could respond from that way, maybe even well, but the whole thing is actually predicated on a lie, because they're not. Whereas, like, what's inspiring about teachers, even not yet enlightened teachers, is that the whole thing is predicated on a truth. Is like we're all trying to do this. And what's inspiring about an Ajahn is that they've been keeping precepts for, decades and decades, and are trying to live their life in line with truth. So, yeah.
Well, you could just change the question. You can ask ChatGPT, please answer that in the way that Venerable Ñānavimala, or that in the way that Luang Por Chah, Luang Por Man would answer that question, and then it wouldn't be a lie.
It wouldn't be a direct lie.
But the crucial difference is that what a Kruba Ajahn would be answering is predicated on the quality of liberation in their Citta. Whereas in ChatGPT, there's not even a Citta, there's not even consciousness.
So, Ajahn,
I'm not so much interested anyhow. As when Ñānavimala would say, we have the teaching of the Buddha anyhow. It is very extensively translated, and no one can, in a sense, teach better. So I feel often it is not so much about getting more teachings. It is more getting the encouragement and inspiration to actually really practice it to the best of our ability, and to get a bit of personal advice and so on. And I think that is all missing in ChatGPT. They wouldn't be able, they can only provide the information. There's also no feedback in ChatGPT responding to your personal situation and your personal level of parami. If you have contact with Kruba Ajahns, what is often so striking is how different they answer depending on who is asking the question. And I have seen it here sometimes, in Luang Por Lia and other Kruba Ajahns, and when the laity is asking questions, these are people I know for a long time. And sometimes even to the extent that superficially it sounds like the Ajahn has missed the question. He's not really answering the question, but he's actually answering what is really important for that person. The ChatGPT could never do that.
So in line with that, Tan Ajahn, first, people are welcome to type questions into the chat, and we'll be able to take some of those soon. But in terms of this immaterial or element or connection that goes beyond just what's logically visible, you have invited many senior Kruba Ajahns to Dhammagiri, and you've had significant moments in the growth of the monastery where you had invited certain monks to chant the Tripitaka, where it feels like forces beyond the kind of strictly discernible have been apparent, or at least there seems to have been some pretty profound serendipity. And I wondered if you would feel up for sharing just a story of faith, either something about, chanting that brought something to pass, or a story of it, senior teacher that you've met that inspired faith in you in one of these more perhaps colorful or less talked about ways.
We just had Lumpur Piak here last Saturday. It was only for 1 hour, but we had a little evening drink, and then he did a short Pavita chanting. We had 10 monks, and the next day I was still very busy, but 2 days later I went from my kuti to do a little bit more of water sprinkling around the stupa in the evening, and I was just amazed. It really seemed to have been charged. It was a kind of power location, always, but after the stupa came now in, and then the Pavita chant with Lumpur Piak, Lumpur Dan had recommended that we should have, the way he expressed it, he said, for the stupa you should have a monk there whose mind is at one with Dhamma. That has a big impact. Maybe what could one share? A story one could share. We were very lucky that Lumpur Plien from Wat Adanya, one of the, those days he has passed away, and one of the most outstanding living disciples of Ajahn Mansfield. And he very luckily came within 4 days since we acquired the first property. But he wasn't meant to come here, he was meant to go to the Thai Dhammayut temple at the Gold Coast. So fortunately, Tanchakun Mahasamai was willing to help me a bit. We did a kidnapping at the airport, the Gold Coast airport. And when traveling there, I tried to really keep my mind wholesome, and I was just repeating, Bhagava Arahang Buddho Buddho Arahang Bhagava Bhagava Arahang Buddho Buddho Arahang Bhagava. My personal Buddha contemplation mantra. And I couldn't believe it when I arrived at the airport and went to the gate where he would be coming. There was actually a picture hanging with a face of the Buddha painted. So I placed myself right next to that Buddha portrait painting and stood there and continued my Buddha Nusati. And then the flight was early, and we could talk to Lumpur Plien before the Thais came who wanted to pick him up, and then he was willing to come for a new forest monastery. And another little story, for the second property, we were in negotiations at the bottom of the hill. In fact, in this short visit, Lumpur Plien, the one which I picked up at the airport, when I asked him some advice how to develop this kind of land into a monastery, he was very insistent that the laity and the main place where the teaching for the laity and all these activities happen should be at the bottom of the hill. And I tried to get across to him, yes, but we can't do that. We only have this property on top here, and then on the other side. But he was really insistent it has to be on the bottom of the hill. And this is exactly how it later came. It's exactly how it later came, because the person living there decided that he wanted to go on a boat and travel around Australia together with his partner, and to sell the property to buy the boat. Then we were in negotiations, and then the financial crisis came 2009, and in the end we were only about $20,000 apart. But we had really stretched to the absolute limit, and he felt he had to go down to as low as he can, and then negotiations stalled. And then one of our Vietnamese supporters, I think you had interviewed her, Ajahn Nissarana, she brought a Burmese Tipitaka Acharya. This is one of those who have learned the whole Tipitaka by heart. Plus, additionally, they have to learn a lot of the commentaries because the examination includes that as well. And when he came, we got him to the top of the property, and as he can recite anything, I said, well, maybe I ask him for the Mahasamaya.
Mm.
It's very known that this is very delightful for the devas. And I explained the situation that we are in these negotiations for the property at the bottom, and whether he can chant that, and whether the devas can maybe help a little bit. And I always had great faith in the Mahasamaya Sutta and that the devas like it. But I didn't anticipate that it would work within 1 hour. Literally 1 hour after that chanting, the owner of the property at the bottom called Dr. Garmini and informed him that he is happy to sell at our price. Yeah, it was quite impressive.
We should probably start chanting.
It's a long sutta. Digha Nikaya 19 or 20. Yeah.
It's not that long. Ajahn Moneo has it by heart.
Mm.
We were going nowhere when we did I was actually in Thailand, and he was trying to get a contractor to do the octagonal concrete foundation for the stupa and the octagonal plinth. Unfortunately, I think in the end he contacted 70 different concrete contractors, and it didn't really go anywhere.
Mm.
And he said in the end he decided to chant Mahasamaya Sutta.
Mm.
And then suddenly this contractor turned up, which we are still using.
Mm.
And he answered emails even in the Christmas New Year period. And then he did the job starting on the 8th of January. And usually everything is completely holiday. There's absolutely nothing happening here in Brisbane.
Tan Ajahn, I'm curious, something that I learned about your biography, I think just you had mentioned it in a talk, is that you actually had Lyme disease at one point. And that's a really it can be an extremely debilitating autoimmune disorder. And I'm curious if you could speak to how you dealt with that mentally, because I know, yeah.
I think I was able to knock it out. The official position is that Australia doesn't have Lyme.
Uh-huh.
However, there are websites where people register, and there's hundreds and thousands of people who quite apparently did get it. And in my case, I have not the slightest doubt, because I had the bull's eyes rash,
Mm-hmm.
which is a super obvious symptom. And I went to a Sri Lankan doctor who conferred with another Sri Lankan doctor in the same surgery, and who called his professor back in Sri Lanka, sending a photo, and she also confirmed it. So I take it as a confirmed case of Lyme.
Mm.
But because I got the bull's eyes rash, you have to be careful. If you have the bull's eyes rash around the tick bite, it's definitely Lyme disease. But you can also have Lyme disease without the bull's eyes rash ever manifesting.
Mm-hmm.
However, because I had it, I immediately took quite strong antibiotics, which I usually avoid. But in this case, I did it, and I did even take more than the normal recommendation, because a lot of that is controversial about Lyme. I'm not sure whether you're aware, Lyme is a place on the East Coast in the US, close to New York. And it's, what is this bay from New York between Long Island and the mainland?
Not sure.
Me neither.
There's a little island where in the 1960s they had a biological warfare research lab, where they also did research on tick-borne diseases. And this little island, Plum Island, is only a few kilometers from the shore, and then on the shore is the little town of Lyme, where the first cases were registered. And I think that's one reason that there's so much controversy about Lyme.
Okay, so good. Well, I'm glad you could heal yourself. Yeah, I'm glad you could heal yourself, and no need for Mahasamaya this time. fortunately.
I'm not sure whether that's the best for healing. That we have Bojjhanga Pavita and others maybe more effective for that. But it's always good to have the devas on your side, and it seems they really like it. I have to say now, I'm assuming that you have a mostly Western audience. Do you know, is that the case?
It's largely Western, but we have a decent contingent of people from Southeast Asia and elsewhere.
Because when you talk about the kind of supernatural phenomena, about devas, about psychic powers, I think it's very important and helpful to talk about that when people come from a more materialistic background, to give them some encouragement that there's more than our school wisdom is teaching us. On the other hand, if we have people who already have extreme faith in that, then talking about that can be counterproductive, because they may be too gullible and they may veer off in that direction too much.
Go back to ChatGPT. Give up on the monks. Yeah.
I'd say in our case, there's the imbalances. I'd say people have really appreciated actually having these issues spoken to. It's a kind of deficit, I think, in the Western Dharma scene. And we probably should move to Zoom soon. But before we do, on that same note, Ajahn, a final question I would like to ask is, in terms of bringing up faith and this other side of the practice in the path, you spoke about this energy and resonance you feel that, Arahants or teachers have like that. And I know a lot of people, once they have had contact with teachers they feel are enlightened, often they'll have dreams of them, or, kind of recollect them when things are dark, and then have this feeling of energy kind of coming to them. How would you speak about or describe this kind of aspect of Sanghanusati, of recollection of the Sangha? Is it something people can access from afar, even if they're not with the teacher? Have you seen it as something that people can kind of invoke if they're going through a really low spot in their life or practice, to bring to mind a teacher and actually receive some genuine energy from that?
No, I believe you can access that, even if you're far away. I believe it will be easier if at least at some stage you had some personal contact. I think that bringing up a strong personal faith and a teacher which you have never met will be more difficult. However, if you know them at least from YouTube and from their teachings, I think then again it will be possible. So the other thing is not falling back on the Buddha. And of course, no one of us had a personal contact with the Buddha. But there's this quote at the end of Alagadupama Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha gives this amazing promise, who is already in the bound for heaven. And the stream entry, and even below that level, the ones who are on the path to stream entry, they're already bound for enlightenment. But then the Buddha says, even those who have a sufficient measure of faith and affection to the Buddha, they're already destined for Devaloka. I mean, this is a promise from the Buddha. The Buddha doesn't just say that now something. And it shows the power of that faculty. Saddha and Pema, Saddha Matam, Pema Matam.
Yes, I wish he had defined how much mata you need. So
yeah, I think it's, for our standards nowadays, it's quite a higher bound. If you read it, it may sound quite little, but I think it's actually a lot. Yeah. But this gives you already a guarantee for Devaloka. I mean, it's so powerful. So it's important to also have faith that you can do that. The moment you say, no, it's not really possible for me, the teacher is far away, this is a kind of self-defeating, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. With these kind of things, you have to psych yourself up and convince yourself that you can do it.
On that note, Tan Ajahn, is there a certain phrase or mantra that you would give people in terms of bringing to mind that faith in the Buddha? I know you spoke about the one you used on the way to the airport, but
yeah, I love that one.
can
Bhagava
you,
Arahant Buddho Buddho Arahant Bhagava Bhagava Arahant Buddho Buddho Arahant Bhagava. For me, Buddho, only Buddho is too simple. I think
Same.
for many nowadays, our mind is quite complicated, and just Buddho, I struggle. This is a little bit more complicated and has got this loop that goes backwards, forwards, backwards. So it's a bit more engaging to my mind. I just like it.
That's beautiful.
You can devise your own one. Whatever works for you is an important one.
thank you, Tan Ajahn. And I think that's a good note. We'll be moving over to Zoom for people who want to, and Ajahn Dhammasīha will be joining us. So I pasted the link in the chat, and you can click on that. If you don't see it, go to clearmountainmonastery.org, and the Wednesday evening live stream listing below has the link to it, the Zoom session. But we just so appreciate you taking the time, Tan Ajahn, even in the middle of a cyclone to join us, and for your teachings, which we do listen to, and just for speaking to us about your life and path and wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. Anumodana for the patience to everyone listening. It was great talking to you. It's very nice the way you're conducting the interview. Very good questions. My pleasure.
Thank you, Ajahn.